The section we're learning today is about completing the square. So your essential question is, what formula do I use to complete the square? So first of all, we're going to try to work out a problem using square roots like what we've done in the past, but we're going to also use perfect squares. So in case you forgot, when we were doing factoring, a perfect square trinomial is something that factors into the square of a binomial, like x plus 5 times x plus 5, or x minus 7 times x minus 7. You get the idea. So we're going to solve the equation x squared plus 20x plus 100 equals 81 by using square roots. And in order to do this, first we have to factor x squared plus 20x plus 100 as a perfect square. So if you think about that, what factors multiply to be 100 and add to be 20? And the answer is 10 and 10. So what we're first going to do is we're going to break that down into x plus 10 squared, because it would be x plus 10 and x plus 10, which is the same as x plus 10 squared. And then we're going to have equals 81. So now what we can do is we can solve by taking the square root, like what we did in the last section. So we're going to take the square root of both sides in order to cancel out the square. And so the square and the square root cancel out, and we just have x plus 10. And then what is the square root of 81? Well, this is where it gets tricky. The square root of 81 can be 9, or it can be negative 9. So we're going to change this into plus or minus 9. So really what that happens when this happens is we have two different equations. We have x plus 10 equals 9, and we have x plus 10 equals negative 9. So we have to solve both of these. So we're going to subtract 10 from both sides, and on this side we get x equals negative 1, and when we subtract 10 on this one, we get x equals negative 19. So we have two solutions, negative 1 and negative 19, that we could plug in for x, and it would both come out to be 81. All right, moving on. Making a perfect square trinomial. So there's a formula that you can use to make a perfect square trinomial if you don't know what the last value is. So it says find the value of c, so that ax squared plus bx plus c, we're trying to find this value, is a perfect square trinomial. Okay, and it says then write the trinomial as the square of a binomial. So the formula for this is, if I want to get the c value, then I just take whatever b is, and I divide it by 2, and then I square the whole thing. So c equals b divided by 2 squared. That's how you make a perfect square trinomial. Okay, and then we'll talk about the binomial part after we do an example, so you know what it means. So, for example, if I have x squared plus 6x plus something, and I want to make sure that this is a perfect square trinomial, then I can use my formula in order to find out what this last value should be, so that it factors into the square of a binomial. So if I take b, in this case a is 1, b is 6, and I don't know what c is, then I would do 6 divided by 2 squared. I'm following my formula here. So b was 6, so I took b divided by 2 squared. Well, what is 6 divided by 2? It's 3, and then 3 squared is 9. So the value of c should be 9. So I'll have x squared plus 6x plus 9. So what are factors of 9 that add to be 6? Well, it would be 3 and 3. So the binomial that we get is x plus 3 squared. Now what this part means up here is it says it factors into x plus b divided by 2. Well, b divided by 2 was 3, so that's kind of like another shortcut that you can use. But you can always just wait and see factors of 9 that add to be 6, and you get the same answer. So let's try a few more examples. X squared minus 3x plus blank. So we would take b, which is negative 3. So negative 3 divided by 2, and then square it. So that'd be negative 3/2 squared. And so the negative part doesn't really matter because when you take a negative and you square it, it comes out positive anyway. So if I take 3/2 times 3/2, that would be 9/4. So this comes out to be a fraction. So this would be x squared minus 3x plus 9/4. So C equals 9/4, which is kind of weird, but that's okay. Now, your binomial is whatever factors of 9/4 are that add to be negative 3. Well, since that's kind of hard to figure out, you can just go back to your b divided by 2. So really, this would be x, this would be x minus 3/2 squared, because your b divided by 2 was negative 3/2. So if I take 3/2 plus 3/2, or negative 3/2 plus negative 3/2, I'll get negative 3. And if I multiply those, I'll get positive 9/4. So that one, it's easier to use the formula. Okay, one more example. All right, so this one, x squared plus 8x plus blank. So we take b divided by 2 squared. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So C equals 16. So I would have x squared plus 8x plus 16. So factors of 16 that add to be 8. B divided by 2 would be 4. So x plus 4 squared. Alright, now, sometimes when I'm solving equations, I can't factor them in order to solve it. And so what I would use completing the square for is to solve an equation that can't be factored. So for instance, if we have x squared minus 10x plus 1 equals 0, and I want to solve it by completing the square, I can't factor x squared minus 10x plus 1 because there are no factors of 1 that add to be negative 10. So what I would do is I can use completing the square to solve this equation. So what I need to do first is I need to make a spot for my c value here. So I need to move this 1 over to the other side. And then I'm going to make a spot for my c value so that I can complete the square. So I'm going to have x squared minus 10x plus c equals negative 1. And then I have to add c to both sides. Because remember, when you're doing stuff with equations, you have to keep your equations balanced. So if you add something on this side, you have to add something on this side. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to complete the square. So just like in those previous examples we did, we're going to do b divided by 2 squared to figure out what our c value is. So in this case, our b value is negative 10. So if I take negative 10 divided by 2 and square it, that would be negative 5 times negative 5, which would be 25. So in this case, our c value is 25. So I'm going to replace the c's with 25s. And now I just simplify. So on this side, negative 1 plus 25 would be 24. And on this side, I have a perfect square trinomial now because I just completed the square. So what I can do with this now is I can factor. So what are factors of 25 that add to be negative 10? Well, it would be x minus 5 times x minus 5. So that would be like x minus 5 squared. So now I can solve this equation using square roots. So to cancel out the square, I'll take the square root of both sides. And so the square and the square root cancel out, and I get x minus 5 equals the square root of 24. Well, really all I can do now is add 5 to both sides, and that's x. But I also want to make sure I break down and simplify the square root of 24. So remember, the square root of 24 is like 4 times 6, because 4 is the largest perfect square that goes into 24. And then if I cross that out, the square root of 4 is 2. So I would get 2 root 6. Now, if I add 5 to both sides, then this becomes x equals 5. And then I have this, remember we have plus or minus anytime we take the square root of something, so it'd be plus or minus 2 times the square root of 6. So, because this could be a positive 2 or a negative 2 since I took the square root of 4. So that would be my answer right there. Now, I've gone back over the steps so that you can write these in your notebook if you want to. That way you can remember how to solve by completing the square. So just remember that in order for an equation to stay equal, whatever you add to one side, you must also add to the other side. So when you do your C value, you have to do that on both sides. So first what we did was we tried to get the x and the x squared by itself. So we moved that 1 over to the other side. Then we completed the square. So we find the value of C. That would make it a perfect square. So you have to do the b divided by 2 squared formula. Then you add both values of C to both sides. And then you simplify the right side. Rewrite the other side as a perfect square trinomial. And then you factor it to the square of a binomial. And then the last thing you do is solve by taking square roots. All right, one last example. Okay, we have 3x squared plus 42x equals negative 24. Now, you'll notice that this time there is a number in front of x squared, and that makes this a little bit more complicated because we can't have a perfect square trinomial with that number in front. It makes it a lot harder to do. We can't use our b divided by 2 squared formula unless there's no number in front of x squared. So if you look at this, we have 3 in front of the x squared. And if you look at all 3 of these terms, you'll notice that all of them are divisible by 3. So whenever there's a number in front of x squared, the easiest thing to do is to divide that number out from all of the terms if it's possible. So we have to get the x and the x squared alone. And so we're going to divide every term by 3. So we're going to go ahead and divide everything by 3. And so then we end up with x squared plus, and then that would be, let's see, 12, yeah, let's see, 14x equals negative 8. So now we're back down to a regular equation like we did last time. So now we have to complete the square. So we need to find the value of C that we can add to both sides in order to complete the square. So then we have to take B, which is 14, divided by 2, and square it. So that equals 14 divided by 2 is 7 squared equals 49. So we're going to add 49 to both sides. So then we can simplify the right side. So negative 8 plus 49 would be 41. And then what are factors of 49 that add to be 14? Well, it'd be 7 and 7. So that would be like x plus 7 squared. So then we can solve by taking square roots. And the square root cancel out, and we get x plus 7 equals the square root of 41. Now, 41 cannot be broken down into any perfect squares, so that one is all the way simplified. So the only thing that we can do is subtract 7 from both sides to solve for x. So we would get x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 41. Because the square root of 41 can be either positive or negative. So that would be all. So that would be the solution. And don't forget to write your summary by going back and answering the essential question.